One of the most underrated mafia families to ever operate in the United States was the Borgata formed around Buffalo, Niagara Falls in upstate New York. The Buffalo family, which became better known as the Stefano Magaddino family, is one of the longest established and at one time one of Cosa Nostra's most powerful networks. In fact, this particular family was deceptively powerful. The Magaddino crime family ruled over a far-flung fiefdom that fanned out over a variety of cities and towns throughout upstate New York and several other states, including Erie, Pennsylvania, and Youngstown, Ohio, and the Hamilton, Ontario province in Canada. The Magaddino family also maintained close ties over the years with several mafia families back in Sicily. In the early 1900s, Angelo Palmieri emerged as the first mafia boss in Buffalo, New York. By 1912, Palmieri stepped down, assuming the role of underboss, which allowed Joseph DiCarlo to become the family's new boss. In 1921, Stefano Magaddino, an influential member of the Castellmerese clan, fled to Buffalo to avoid murder charges in Avon, New Jersey, related to the death of Camillo Caizo, the man who had killed Magaddino's brother Pietro, in Italy. Magaddino had first immigrated to New York City from Castellmare del Golfo, Sicily, in 1902, and joined the Castellmerese clan in Brooklyn. The Castellmerese clan consisted of mobsters originating from Castellmare del Golfo, which included the Magaddino brothers and their cousins, the Bonanno brothers. Stefano Magaddino was born on October 10, 1891, in Castellmare, Sicily. Before leaving Sicily, the Magaddino brothers, Antonio, Pietro, and Stefano, were involved in a feud with the Buccellato brothers. The Magaddino and Bonanno family feuded with Felice Buccellato, the boss of the Buccellato mafia clan. After the murders of Stefano and Giuseppe Bonanno, their younger brother, Salvatore, the father to Joe Bonanno, took revenge by killing members of the Buccellato family. During this time, the youngest Magaddino brother, Pietro, was murdered, and the other two brothers, Antonio and Stefano, fled Italy for the United States, settling in Brooklyn. On August 16th in 1921, Stefano Magaddino was arrested as a fugitive from justice involving a murder that took place in Avon, New Jersey. Shortly after this, Magaddino and Gaspar Milazzo were shot at as they walked out of a Brooklyn store. The attempted ambush resulted in the death of two innocent bystanders. The shooting attempt had been made by members of the Buccellato clan. The retaliation would claim the lives of several Buccellato men. When police suspected Magaddino and Milazzo of the murders, they both fled Brooklyn for Buffalo and Detroit, respectively. August of 1921, a barber named Bartolo Fontana turned himself into the New York police, confessing to murdering Camillo Caizo a couple of weeks earlier in Avon, New Jersey. Fontana claimed he murdered Caizo at the behest of the Good Killers, a group of mafiosi who hailed from Castellmare del Golfo, in retaliation for Caizo's involvement in the 1916 murder of Magaddino's brother Pietro. The organization known as the Good Killers Gang was comprised of immigrant mafiosi of the Bonventure and Magaddino families, of Castellamare del Golfo in Sicily and their allies, divided into crews of about 15 men. It had been in a state of war for a decade and a half since its leader, a Brooklyn baker named Bonaventure, was brutally murdered by the rival Buccioletto clan, also in Italy. The resulting gang war was conducted on both sides of the Atlantic, back in Sicily, as well as in cities in the United States, such as New York and Detroit, where there were significant Castellamare populations. Joseph Bonanno, a native of Castellamare, who would rise to rule a New York crime family, explained the situation in his autobiography. He noted that his cousin Stefano Magaddino and Magaddino ally Gaspar Milazzo were important men in the Brooklyn-based Bonaventure underworld faction. As my cousin Stefano and Gaspar Milazzo made their way up, they came into conflict with rival groups in our world. Very often, these rivals were friends and relatives of enemies in Sicily. The Magaddino family was not alone in having members in America. The Buccioletto family did also. They were arch-enemies in Castellamare, and arch-enemies they remained in Brooklyn. Bartolo Fontana began associating with the organization probably around 1913-1914, when he lived in a Castellamarese colony in Detroit, Michigan, and went by his given name of Bartolomeo Fontana. It seems unlikely that he ever became a full member of the group, but he watched as it pursued its vendetta against Buccioletto men. Fearful of being linked with the murders, the good killers either terrorized young immigrants into working as assassins or sponsored the immigration of men who would do the blood work. The assignment often turned out badly for the assassin. When a group of good killers moved from Detroit to Brooklyn, Fontana went along. The barber gave the authorities details he could remember of 15 murders committed by the gang, and of the one he was ordered to commit under the threat of death. He provided the names of 6 good killers' gang leaders who had compelled him to slay his boyhood friend, Camilla Kaizo. 3 of the leaders lived on Roebling Street in Brooklyn. They were Stefano Magaddino, 29, Magaddino's brother-in-law, Bartolo Di Gregorio, 32, and Vito Bonaventure, 46. The other 3 good killers' leaders were all from Manhattan. Giuseppe Lombardi, 41, of Elizabeth Street, Mariano Galante, 27, of 198 Orchard Street, and Francesco Puma, 35, of East 12th Street. Camilla Kaizo was deemed responsible for the death of a Magaddino relative back in the old country. This alleged crime appears to have been the unsolved 1916 murder of Stefano Magaddino's brother, Pietro. The Magaddino clan seemed to have initially attributed that murder to the treachery of the Bucciolettos, into whose family Pietro had married. Several Buccioletto members were murdered in 1916 under that assumption. As Camilla Kaizo arrived on Ellis Island aboard the steamer Lavoie on June 28, 1920, most likely fleeing Magaddino retribution, word of his offense was sent from Sicily. The good killers were assigned to carry out the vendetta. Kaizo initially settled with his mother Maria and siblings on East 12th Street in Manhattan. Apparently, sensing danger, he steered clear of good killers gang member Francesco Puma, who lived in the same neighborhood. After a year, the good killers apparently decided They could get to Kaizo easiest by using his boyhood friend, Bartolo Fontana, to catch him off guard. Fontana claimed he learned of the murder plot when 3 of the gang leaders backed him into a hallway, pressed the muzzles of their pistols into his stomach, and told him to swear to commit the crime, or they would blow him to pieces. Fontana had seen enough of the good killers in action in Detroit to know the grave position he was in. He gave in to the pressure and took an oath to murder Kaizo. The 2 old chums became reacquainted in the summer of 1921 and may even have moved in together briefly. In late July, Fontana proposed a combination business trip and vacation in New Jersey. Kaizo had recently sold an embroidery business, earning $700. Fontana urged him to invest the proceeds in a disorderly house, a brothel. He offered to put his old friend in touch with a New Jersey acquaintance who managed such an establishment near Shark River in Monmouth County. Fontana suggested they spend a few days there and enjoy some hunting in the countryside. The pair arrived Thursday, July 26th, at the Riverview Inn in Neptune City. The inn was managed by Salvatore Saravo, known locally as Salvatore Rose. On Saturday, Kaizo took a train back to New York City. The purpose of this trip is unknown, but while in the city, he visited his family. This would be the last time Maria Kaizo would see her son alive. During his absence, Fontana told his host how the good killers had demanded he kill Camilla Kaizo. Saravo knew of the gang and understood that Fontana had no reasonable option other than to murder his friend. The innkeeper offered Fontana the use of a shotgun and recommended that the deed be done in the woods, away from the inn. Kaizo returned to Neptune City on Sunday, and he and Fontana went duck hunting the following day. The 2 men ventured toward an overgrown and marshy area along Shark River. Fontana, holding Saravo's shotgun, lagged just a step behind Kaizo as they hiked. When the men were out of sight of the inn, Fontana put the muzzle of the shotgun against his old friend's back and jerked the trigger. The weapon seems to have been loaded for more than birds. Lead slugs ripped a large hole through Kaizo's back and side. Panicked and stricken with guilt, Fontana rushed back to the inn, leaving his good friend Camilla Kaizo where he had fallen. New Jersey decided not to pursue conspiracy charges in the Kaizo murder, and the charges against Magaddino were dropped, despite the New York police officer's testimony about the sting linking him to the murder. Magaddino fled New York City after his release, ending up in the Buffalo, New York area. Buffalo crime family boss Joseph DiCarlo died in 1922, and Stefano Magaddino succeeded him as boss. Once established in the Buffalo, Niagara Falls area, Magaddino ran a profitable bootlegging business due to the close proximity to Canada. The Buffalo family allowed Cleveland Syndicate and Mo Dalit's big Jewish Navy to smuggle illegal booze from Canada through Buffalo. However, in 1933, when remnants of another Cleveland gang, the Perello family, tried to muscle in on the Buffalo corn sugar business, guns blazed, and the Perellos were turned back, losing their 5th family member in 4 years. After Prohibition ended, Magaddino and his crime family made their money by means of loan sharking, illegal gambling, extortion, carjacking, and labor racketeering, as well as other legitimate lucrative businesses, such as linen service businesses that served the needs of most of the hotels located throughout the region, taxi cab companies, and other service-oriented businesses. In 1930, the Castellammerese War was raging in New York City. The war pitted Salvatore Maranzano against Joe the Boss Masseria. Maranzano was from the Sicilian coastal town of Castellammare del Golfo, from which the war took its name. When the war broke out, the Masseria force, the largest of the two factions, boasted the likes of Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, Albert Anastasia, Tom Gagliano, and Tommy Lucchese. On the Maranzano side was Joe Profaci, Joe Magliocco, and Joe Bonanno, who was Magaddino's cousin. During the months of fighting, Magaddino helped the Maranzano cause by sending $5,000 a week. The war came to an end on April 15, 1931, when Luciano set up Masseria to be hit in a Coney Island restaurant. Maranzano was murdered 6 months later, on September 10th, in his Park Avenue office. Magaddino had many enemies over the years and survived several attempts on his life. With the repeal of Prohibition, the Western New York Mafia focused its attention on the control of illegal gambling. In 1936, a gang of rebellious bookmakers opposed Magaddino's tax on their profits. On May 19, 1936, a bomb intended for Magaddino exploded at the house of his sister and brother-in-law at 1651 Whitney Avenue in Niagara Falls, New York. The sister, Arcangelo Longo, was killed, her 3 young daughters injured in the blast. Leaders of the rebel organization were executed over the following year. In 1958, another murder attempt was made when a grenade hurled through a window into the kitchen of Stefano Magaddino's home at Dana Drive in Lewiston, New York, but failed to explode. Some believe the murder attempt was made by angry mobsters who wanted revenge for the disastrous Appalachian Mafia meeting in 1957 that Magaddino organized. Rumor has it that Magaddino talked Vito Genovese into having the meeting at Joseph Barbera's New York home instead of holding it in Chicago. Many believe that Magaddino was one of the meeting participants who escaped through the woods when police arrived. The fact that law enforcement officials found some of his personal belongings left behind at the Barbera home helps to bolster this claim. Buffalo family members arrested at Appalachian were Magaddino's brother, Antonio, James LaDuca, a son-in-law, John Montana, and Rosario Roy Carlissi. In the 1990s, Roy Carlissi's brother, Sam Wings Carlissi, would run the Chicago outfit for a short time. John Montana, who moved into the position of Magaddino's Buffalo-based underboss, was a leading businessman and political figure in the city and helped the Magaddino Mafia secure its connections to local government. Magaddino's crime family held power in the underworld territories of upstate and western New York, namely Buffalo, New York, bordering Canada, and situated on Lake Erie, Rochester, and Utica, along the Mohawk River as far east as Amsterdam, New York, from eastern Pennsylvania as far west as Youngstown, Ohio, and in Canada from Fort Erie opposite Buffalo to Toronto, Ontario, and as far east as Montreal, Quebec. By the 1960s, it was reported that Magaddino's crime syndicate supplied drugs to the Canadian cities of Hamilton and Guelph, which in turn supplied drugs to Toronto. July 20th, 1961, two brothers, Albert and Vito Iguchi, were engaged in narcotics trafficking in the Greater Buffalo area. American and Canadian authorities broke up a regional narcotics ring. The operation had been approved by Magaddino, who regularly took a share of its profits. Among those arrested were Alberto and Vito Iguchi, Magaddino underlings from Canada. The brothers, who were born and raised in Sicily, had the blessing of Magaddino and paid him a percentage of their drug profits. In return, they were to be provided with protection from other gang members and legal help if they ran into problems. The imprisoned Iguchis expected but did not receive Magaddino protection or support. Alberto was freed on bail after his wife borrowed money and sold the family home. He reportedly intended to confront Magaddino and demand that the boss provide bail for Vito Iguchi's release, threatening to expose Magaddino's involvement in the narcotics ring if Vito was not released. On November 23, 1961, the 38-year-old Albert Iguchi was found on a farm near Rochester, New York. His badly mutilated corpse had an estimated 30 pounds of flesh carved from it. Iguchi's jaw was shattered and half his teeth knocked out. Finally, he had been strangled with a clothesline, soaked in gasoline, and set on fire. Vito Iguchi was convicted on the narcotics charges and sent to the Atlanta Penitentiary to serve his sentence. A year later, the FBI installed electronic eavesdropping equipment in the Magaddino Memorial Chapel, a funeral home that served as the principal meeting place for Magaddino and his underworld associates. The device gathered enough information within 3 years to fill 70,000 transcribed pages. Magaddino was identified as irrefutable boss of the mafia of Western New York and Southern Ontario before the McLennan Senate Investigating Committee in 1963. In the early 1960s, Magaddino's cousin, Joe Bonanno, who had already been expanding his influence into Canada, Arizona, and Sicily, decided to make a power play in New York City. Since the late 1920s and early 1930s, Magaddino had been a big supporter of his cousin. But now, Magaddino believed Bonanno, along with his other moves, was trying to muscle in on some of his territory in Canada. Magaddino at one time was rumored to be on a Bonanno hit list. In 1963, Joseph Bonanno made plans to assassinate his own cousin, Stefano Magaddino, and several rivals on the Mafia Commission, bosses Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, as well as Frank DeSimone. Bonanno sought Profaci crime family boss Joseph Magliocco's support, and Magliocco readily agreed due to his bitterness from being denied a seat on the commission. Bonanno's audacious goal was to take over the commission and make Magliocco his right-hand man. Magliocco was assigned the task of killing Lucchese and Gambino and gave the contract to one of his top hitmen, Joseph Colombo. However, the opportunistic Colombo revealed the plot to its intended targets. The other bosses quickly realized that Magliocco could not have planned this himself. Remembering how close Bonanno was with Magliocco and before him Joe Profaci, as well as their close ties through marriages, The other bosses concluded that Bonanno was the real mastermind. The commission summoned Bonanno and Magliocco to explain themselves. Fearing for his life, Bonanno fled to Canada, leaving Magliocco to deal with the commission. Magliocco agreed and admitted his role in the plot. He was fined $50,000, stripped of his role as boss of the Bafacci family, and replaced by Joe Colombo. Magliocco died of natural causes in 1963. The commission ruled that Bonanno had forfeited his position and installed Gaspar de Gregorio as head of the family. De Gregorio was Magliocco's brother-in-law and had been Bonanno's best man in his 1931 wedding. This decision upset factions within the Bonanno family and instigated what became known as the Banana War, which raged from 1964 to 1969. October 1964, Joseph Bonanno returned to Manhattan. But on October 20th, 1964, the day before Bonanno was scheduled to testify to a grand jury inquiry, his lawyers said that after having dinner with them, Bonanno was kidnapped, allegedly by Magaddino's brother, Antonio, and his son, Peter, as he entered the apartment house where one of his attorneys lived on Park Avenue and East 36th Street. According to Bonanno, during the time he was held captive, Magaddino had succeeded in maintaining an air of mystery about the kidnapping. After Bonanno was released, he and Magaddino never saw each other again. The Banana War effectively ended in 1968, when Bonanno suffered a heart attack and retired, or was banished to Arizona. For 50 years, Stefano Magaddino was a dominant presence in the Buffalo underworld. He was the longest tenured boss in the history of the American mafia. Magaddino led his Buffalo family through its glory years and its most powerful and profitable era. He was an old-style boss who preferred to stay in the background and not draw any attention to himself or his criminal activities when possible. Stefano Magaddino died of a heart attack on July 19, 1974, at the age of 82, at Mount St. Mary's Hospital in Lewiston, New York. His funeral was held at St. Joseph's Catholic Church. He was buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery on Pine Avenue in Niagara Falls.